Hello, friends. Welcome to Logistics of Logistics podcast. My name is Joe Lynch. Thank you so much for joining us today. Today's topic is solving the freight broker's biggest problem with my friend Brad Hollister. How's it going, Brad?
Hey, Joe. How are you?
Doing great, doing great. Brad, please introduce yourself and your company and where you're calling from today.
I'm Brad Hollister, and I am the head of growth with Upwell. And we are an accounts receivable automation platform.
Accounts receivable. Say that one more time.
Automation.
All right. Please explain. What is that?
Well, the title of this show is Solving the Freight Broker's Biggest Problem. And I will say there is no shortage of problems for leadership of freight brokers today. I mean, security fraud is huge.
True.
I mean, so many problems. But we think the biggest problem is getting paid. And as Charlie Dahoney, our CEO, says, he's never lost sleep paying carriers. He's only lost sleep figuring out how he can get paid and to pay his employees. And it's been an interesting ride to watch what Upwell has done in a very, very short amount of time to help brokers cut 4 or 5 days off their days outstanding on their accounts receivable. And that's massive to their operation, right? The impact.
Yep. So you said days outstanding, and that is an accounting. No, that's an accounting measurement. What is that?
When you have accounts receivable, like what's your average receipt time for getting those bills paid? That's what we're trying to attack. That's what we're trying to stop letting the broker's customers hold that money or put it in the mail. We want to try to get that into the broker's accounts or the carrier's accounts as fast as possible so that the broker and the carrier can turn that around and use that cash that they're owed instead of letting the customers hold on to that cash. So it's turning that cash. It's helping the brokers to then have the money and the resources to address all the other problems, technology, security. I mean, without the money, you can't address those issues.
Yeah, it's exactly right. So, if you got lots of money in the bank, you're like, I can address some of my problems. If I got a customer service problem, I can hire a customer service company or a person or an outside resource. When you don't get paid, we'll get more into the details about that in a minute. But so you didn't answer. Where are you located?
Well, I just relocated back to Wisconsin from 3 years in Puerto Rico. And it was a nice 3-year vacation. But, I certainly miss the Midwest in the fall, especially. And, being that it's November now, it's great to be up in the North Woods.
And you're in the North Woods of Wisconsin, right?
That's right.
North of Madison?
3 hours north of Madison. Yeah. So almost to the Canadian border, like an hour outside at Green Bay.
You live close to Santa Claus.
Yeah. That's right.
So anyway, let's get into a little bit about so you mentioned the 3-year vacation. I'm sure people are going, oh, that sounds good. How do you go about 3 years in Puerto Rico? So tell us a little bit about you. Where'd you grow up? Where'd you go to school? Some career highlights before you went on that 3-year vacation and then later joined Upwell.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so I'm from Wisconsin. I grew up in a little town that a lot of people know called Lake Geneva. It's a tourist town.
Oh, I love that place.
Yeah, it's a great place, and it's funny because people that have been there say, "Oh, did you live on the lake?" Well, kind of. We all worked on the lake, right? All the local people and all the kids work either in the hospitality industry as kids, or the dream job for a Lake Geneva kid is to work renting out the wave runners.
I've rented out the wave runners on that lake.
So if you can work for one of those companies, that's probably the best job a high school kid could get, and even like into college. And so I did that for a few years, and so that was a fun place to grow up for sure. But living on the lake, like with my parents' home on the lake, no, we were quite a ways away from the lake, but spent most of my time on the water. Yes.
Yep. For people, I don't normally like to interrupt it when someone's telling their story, but for those of you who are not familiar, Lake Geneva at one time, and I think it's probably still true, had some of the wealthiest people in America living there. And so I think it was always about 90 minutes from Chicago. So it's this beautiful area. So anyone who had money in Chicago back in the day, would take the rail over to Lake Geneva, which is a gorgeous lake. It's huge. And then I think when after the one Chicago fire, a lot of the wealthier families just said, the hell with it. We're not moving back to Chicago. They had a number of fires. It's over. There was a conventional thought was they aren't going to rebuild it. They did. And so there was a whole bunch. I remember one time there was like six of the families who lived on that lake were in the Forbes 400 wealthiest people in America.
Yeah, it's a very expensive lake. I don't know if you can get on there for $5 million at this point.
Oh yeah, unbelievable homes.
The Wrigley family still owns like 100 acres on there, but that's been maybe fourth generation. It's just tremendous wealth, being that it's essentially a suburb of Chicago.
Yeah, it's funny when you're driving from. My in-laws live not far from there, so I remember I would drive over there, and it's like small town, another small town. You're like farm, small town. This is a small town. There's a whole bunch of stock brokerages here. What's going on here? And then like, what's all these little boutiques? You're like, what's going on? Is this like a little Wisconsin town? Kinda.
Yeah. I mean, when you see the license plates parked, it's all Illinois.
They also had a Playboy mansion there, or Playboy nightclub there, which is very old timey. But anyway,
yeah, in the 70s, it was a great place to grow up. And I ended up going to college at University of Wisconsin La Crosse, and I wrestled there. So that's Division III wrestling, and I wrestled at La Crosse. Finished up with an undergrad in marketing, and then had gone on to sell airplane parts right before 9/11, which was a crazy
time to sell.
Yeah, crazy time to work at. But I spent a lot of time in Latin America, even after 9/11. I speak Spanish and Portuguese, so was able to visit all those companies, and crazy stories about, the lack of OSHA and in these in and out of these like hangars and warehouses and things. And then, got into transportation through some guys from wrestling that I knew, that helped us to get into the consulting side first. Or I got in with them, I should say. And then I went to work for Saya, went and did freight brokerage. And then I started a series of technologies that didn't work before hitting pay dirt with Swan Leap, which was a TMS company that was acquired in 2021.
Yep. So I have a few questions about Swan Leap. I did interview you years ago, I think after you sold Swan Leap. So first off, the name. I want to understand the name. Then I want to understand kind of how was it that you exited that business? And by the way, I think you also bootstrapped that. Am I right to say that? My memory's fading.
We did. Yeah, that was
how you went about bootstrapping a tech company, because that's not done all the time these days. And then how did you exit, and how did you end up down in Puerto Rico for 3 years on vacation? I'd like that myself.
Well, I'll get to that. It sounds great on the surface, but so Swan Leap, the name wasn't Swan Leap when we started. The company was born in 2013. In like the era of visibility just starting. And we always said that visibility wasn't only tracking. We saw visibility as complete visibility through the life cycle of the transaction. So from like how the decision is made, how to ship something, to where it is in transit, to the data on the bill. And I don't know about today in 2024, but I still would probably guess that a lot of companies don't have a nice data lake with all their freight data super organized and ready to analyze. I think that it's probably still a little bit of a problem, but certainly lots of companies have come online to try to address that and give people the power to, or give companies the power to make decisions from their data. So Clearview was the name of the company, and we got some fan mail one day from another company called Clearview that audited telephone software defending their trademark. And my first reaction was like, fight them. We're going to fight them. And my attorney's like, yeah, we can fight them, but there's like 200 and other Clearview companies out there. So our legal advice is to make a name that doesn't mean anything. And you've seen that in our space, all the strange names. Well, they're done for a reason, because it can't be mistaken for anything else. It needs to be when you say your company name the first time, it has to mean nothing. Otherwise, you probably owe somebody some kind of IP for making those words mean something. Does that make sense? That's how it was explained to me. So when we had to rebrand and change our name, um, we wanted to embody the black swan because we thought what we were doing at the time was pretty unique compared to the competitors that we were coming up against in the space. So then, Joey, it was a function of finding a domain.com that had swan in it, and we thought the leap was a good visual for how we're going to help the industry to leap forward. So,
And by the way, I know back then I didn't know you, but I did know of your company because you were always on that list of one of the fastest growing companies. And only after I met you and learned that you bootstrapped that did it seem like, wow, that's sensational. And we saw, especially during COVID and maybe even today, we saw a lot of VC backed companies that had explosive growth. And I wish them all well. But there's a lot of those grow fast and flame out for whatever reason. And you and I had a long talk about VC money before we hit record. I don't think you're against it. I'm not against it, but it is rare to see a super fast growing company, especially one of the fastest growing companies, be bootstrapped. So talk about growing that company as a bootstrapped company, and then talk about the exit.
well, yeah, we had talked about before the recording about like taking VC money. If you don't have to, you shouldn't. And I was in that boat before. I'm not in that boat anymore, but um, I felt that if we could pay our own bills, then let's just have fun and make a company and not take on, more bosses and more direction on what the company does. We had an interesting model. We had Swan Leap had the subscription revenue for the technology, but then we also had marketplace revenue that we received from helping companies to meet other carriers. For example, we weren't a broker. We didn't take possession of the freight. We didn't hide the billing. But if somebody wanted to use our marketplace, that was a whole different set of fees. And the fees were pretty lucrative, so we could actually do pretty well and fund our own growth. So in hindsight, I think VCs bring more than just capital, at least the right ones. I think that they help you to see, a lane and shoot through that while the opportunity is open. Um, and I think Swan Leap probably could have taken that and gotten through and become a leader a lot quicker based on the tech stack that we built. But we could only call so many companies a week, and it took us forever to get the traction to get. I mean, we still went to like Honda and Dish Network and like Polaris, and they told us like, oh, you're not on Gartner Magic Quadrant. And Gartner wanted, I think at the time, like certain number of years of revenue growth and of revenue in different markets, and like we didn't have revenue in Europe and stuff, which was a requirement for. And so to be included in the Gartner Magic Quadrant was a pretty substantial qualification, really, in and of itself. So we didn't qualify, so we were kind of bounced out of a lot of big opportunities, which prevented us from becoming a household name on this in the Gartner Magic Quadrant, which is how big companies buy software, right? I mean,
So get onto that exit. How did you exit the company, and then tell us about your 3 years vacationing in the Caribbean, and then why you joined Upwell.
well, COVID was really hard on us, on our business, because Swan Leap, we did a lot in the oil and gas space. And because a lot of our revenue was from marketplace revenue, if the company wasn't using the marketplace, we weren't getting that revenue. So our revenue is down a lot during COVID. And it was a factor of our client mix, our customer base. So we decided as a family, Madison Dane County is the county that Madison schools are in, and they decided to close schools for the year during COVID. And so COVID was a big factor in this because we decided to go overseas for a couple of months because my programmers wouldn't come to work anyways. So it was just literally my ops person and my controller and I in the office. And we had like 50,000 square feet or something of office space that three of us were in there every day. It was a crazy time, as we all remember. But I said, it doesn't really make sense for us to stay here in Wisconsin in the winter. And my son's crawling up a wall, anyways, going to online school. So let's go somewhere. So we decided to go to Puerto Rico for vacation for 2 months. Vacation meaning like, we worked, the boys and I worked at the table. They were in school. I was at work doing call after call after call. And so it was good. And then we had, in the first quarter of 2021, we had like 7 or 8 inbound inquiries from strategics to acquire us.
Nice.
It was nice, but as a founder, most founders, I don't think, go into founding a company with an exit in mind. So for me, to get through going through such a hard startup, you have to really be ride or die. You have to, and your co-founder or co-founders need to be ride or die, and your spouses, your families, all have to be all in on this company. So when you're that committed to making a company grow, like there's no time to start thinking about, plan B, C, D, or beyond. Like there is no contingency. Like it is ride or die. And so we literally thought it was going to be like a publicly traded company or dead. And if you've ever read the book Shoe Dog by Phil, it's Shoe Dog really applies to every company. It just
That's Phil Knight from Nike.
yeah. I'm sorry. But the Nike story is the same story that every entrepreneur lives. Like when you're reading Shoe Dog, like literally the next chapter, you think the company isn't going to make it to the next chapter. If you didn't already know Nike in present day, you would think they were dead at that point. And then he somehow gets around that. And that's actually the life of an entrepreneur. And it goes like that for everybody.
Yeah, I've said this many times when I've interviewed hundreds of founders, and to hear them tell their story, it's usually we failed, and then we failed, and we failed, and I always say, get to the point where you actually had some success, and but I think that's the nature of it. Is I think there's an old saying, Winston Churchill says, success is falling from failure to failure with enthusiasm or without losing optimism.
I think the measure of an entrepreneur is really entangled in how they deal with failure. Really quick story on this. So I coached youth wrestling for a while, being a college wrestler, and some of the other dads that were coaching were actually very high caliber college wrestlers too. So we weren't paid; we were just volunteering, all of us, and we knew each other since we competed against each other when we were in high school, and I think a couple of them even younger than that. And we were standing around the mat one day, and we were like reminiscing about the good old days. And I said, "You remember that one kid from Fond du Lac, Wisconsin?" Yeah. I'm like, "Oh yeah, he beat me." And then a few minutes later, another name came up. I was like, "Yeah, I lost to him at this tournament." And then like another few minutes went by, and it was another name came up, and I was like, "Yeah, I lost him in overtime." One of the dads turned to me and he goes, "Did you ever win?"
Right.
I hardly ever lost, Joe. Hardly ever. But I don't remember any wins. I only remember losses. And I think the losses are what fueled, the grind that it took to compete at a high level in anything. And that's certainly the case with entrepreneur, any entrepreneur. The biggest surprise in going through the journey was just like oftentimes how employees can turn on you. Like how like if I noticed if like I traveled too much and I wasn't there, it was just different. I mean, just and COVID really changed our company dynamic where people were leaving stock options to take a job for $5,000 or $10,000 more. It's just I hated that COVID that I couldn't see the people's faces every day and couldn't like come over and like pat them on the back and say good job on that. Like that was stripped from managers and executives during COVID. Like you could Zoom somebody and tell them good job or call them out on a team call, but it's just not the same. It doesn't have the same effect. And so that's what really started helping me to get over like see my life beyond the company. We were sitting out on the veranda overlooking the beach in Puerto Rico, and I looked out at the beach and I said, what if I'm not a billionaire? What if this is all this is? Life is just this, what I see in front of me. It's pretty good. Like it doesn't have to be it doesn't have to be like, Instagram, like, where, it doesn't have to be like that. It can still be pretty good without that. And I was also enjoying the time with my kids. And so we entertained several of these offers, and it was more about the synergy and the fit. Like some were foreign companies that were trying to break into the U.S. market. Some were a freight forwarding software trying to get into domestic freight. I mean, it was a good strategic fit and good reasons for several of these. And ultimately, what got me excited about selling to Transportation Impact or Insight, excuse me, the NTG Group, Nolan Transportation Group in Atlanta, was sitting with Kevin Nolan. If anybody's ever sat with him, he's an awesome dude. I mean, he's been around forever. He
I want to get him on the podcast. I've asked him. I don't know whatever happened with that. I should follow up with him. I know he's out. He's more of an investor now, but I know he's done fantastically well.
and he deep down he's still a freight broker, dialing for dollars guy. Like he loves that. He loves the hunt, the kill. And I don't know him that well, but that he sold me on why this thing that we worked so hard and gave up so much for deserved to be in the hands of him. His.
So did Transportation Insight get bought by Nolan, or did Nolan get bought by Transportation? And
I think it was a kind of came together. I think there was a lot of synergies that there was a lot of mutual benefit. So I'm not sure. It was before I came on.
yep. So you had a few years off after you sold your company, you made that transition, and then you're down in Puerto Rico, living the good life, or seemingly perfect. But what made you come back? What made you first off? What made you join Upwell and come back to the States? Well, I know Puerto Rico is a territory, so it's technically the States, I guess.
So I stayed down in Puerto Rico for 3 years. I did a bunch of investing. I actually built with my wife a very big real estate company, and deployed all the capital, invested.
I talked to you about in Vegas, or was it San Diego? One of the conferences I talked to you about that. Yeah, congratulations on that.
Well, thanks. It's still. I mean, we're still like looking at. It has to. Real estate's not passive. So we're constantly looking at like the bottom performers in our portfolio to see what we need to kind of adjust and deploy. And it's not a great time to sell, but we look at it weekly to see how the performance is going. But I also did some seed investing in a handful of companies, learned a lot there. And Upwell was one of the companies that I invested in. Charlie Dahoney's been a friend of mine a long time. I think a lot of people would say that about Charlie, that they've been friends with him a long time.
He's a fast friend too. If you meet Charlie,
Yeah, yeah, he really is. I mean, he definitely, and he's, when you start to uncover rocks in our industry, like pick up rocks, you're going to find like Charlie was involved in some of these companies, and it's like, holy cow. I mean, Charlie's lived 10 lives, and like all the things.
he's been a founder multiple times. He has been. His last stop was ZBox, where he was, and I think that's an accelerator or an incubator where he worked with dozens of companies. I know he's been an investor. I know he's written checks into companies and then jumped in and headed up sales. He's had some successful exits. He's been there, done that, got the hat. If there is ever somebody like that.
Yeah, and so he was bound. We were doing some investing together. He would bring me stuff. Hey, I'm thinking about investing. Putting this money in, and you should do that. And so it was we were starting to build some together. But then he was kicking around this idea, and I think any good company needs a story, like a purpose, a why. And he told me the story of when he owned his own brokerage, and he still owns some assets as well. Like at night and on the weekends, that he and his wife would have to do the billing. like because this customer required certain billing to be done a certain way, or this customer had needed this document. And so all these rules that live are typically in the minds of the accounting people. And so he told me, like, Brad, I think we can automate this. I think we can do this. And his excitement is contagious. It wasn't a problem that I had firsthand knowledge of, but until I started getting into it and seeing this, he got me really excited. So the company launched. They built product in 23. They really launched in May. They had first paying customers a little earlier than that, but they really took on like a sales guy and a marketing initiative in May. And so watching the company grow so quickly in just the last number of months was really exciting for me. We were my personal life plays into this because timing really worked. I was in Puerto Rico. My oldest son graduated high school. So we spent the summer together in Puerto Rico, and we actually kind of cleaned it up, painted, did some things, and moved out of Puerto Rico. We also moved out of Madison, our house in Madison. And we bought a house up in the North Woods thinking that I will never work again or never, have to commute or anything again. And we just want to be out in the woods and, have it be peaceful. So we moved out of Madison. We moved out of Puerto Rico into Wisconsin, and then we're homeschooling our other two children. And so my son is 13, and I can't be out like on the tractor or on the skid steer or doing stuff outside, projects and things, and have him looking out the window and listening to the backup, siren on the tractor or whatever. He would drive him up a wall for sure because he wants to do that stuff. He doesn't want to read about the Roman Empire, right? So I said, well, why don't I just do some work with Charlie, because like I can help out while Ben's in school, and then when he gets out of school, then we can go out and do all of our guy stuff. So I started sitting on some calls with Charlie's team. I started like helping with some messaging, having some conversations with Charlie, and I'm like, look, I can help. Like I don't mind making cold calls, making some intros. I know lots of people. My network's strong, and I started to do that, and then it just kind of naturally fell in.
The rest is history.
Yeah. So it was more about like, it started out as fun, and it was like very organic, the way that the relationship came together. So I have Charlie the other day called me one of his mentors. I mean, I would say the same for him. I mean, I wasn't expecting to hear him say that about me. He's certainly a mentor to me. And so there's like a mutual, just really good energy. And then
yeah, he's given me some great advice along the way too. Just one of those guys, and he's very generous with. He's a busy man, but he's been very generous with his time towards me. So appreciate that.
And I mean, the team that he built at Upwell, but it is so. His ability to recognize opportunity is so like spot on, right? So he knew when he meets somebody, he's like, that person, this is where they can go in the company, and I really want that person. We got to find a spot for them, and the team that he built there is incredible.
So let's get into this topic again. So today's topic is solving the freight broker's biggest problem, and the biggest problem freight brokers have is not getting paid on time. And so I know I'm gonna tick off some of the problems that caused, and then I want you to elaborate on them. So one of the challenges you have in a freight brokerage is not always a high margin business. Our friend Kevin Hill posted not so long ago that there was 30,000 freight brokers. Now we're down to 25,000 freight brokers. None of those 5,000 freight brokers went out of business because they had really good cash flow. They had probably just the opposite. And what's a challenge a lot of times is you got to do the invoicing, and then a lot of times it's difficult, so they end up just factoring. You factor because the factoring companies usually have some automation. They have figured it out. And, one of my sponsors, Denim, they do a great job on that. There's others, but there's companies that say, we will take that burden off your plate. And there are lots of other issues. There's sales problems. This is a low margin business. There's plenty of problems to deal with. but you can deal with problems if you have money. If you don't have money, you have to go get money. And I think what happens is people go, the hell with it, we'll factor it, or we'll just tolerate not getting paid on time. And a lot of the reasons is a lot of shippers say, I want the following information on that invoice. And um, the trusting Joe says, yes, they put it on there because they need it for their processing. The untrusting Joe says, you want stuff on there that allows you to reject my bill every other time I send it. So
The truth is somewhere in the middle, maybe.
yes. And again, I don't think people wake up in the morning and say, I'm going to go do something sinister or evil, but everybody who's in business is waiting on money. And in a low margin business, like a lot of freight brokers are, they don't want to have to hire another person to get paid. They don't want to factor invoices because they're not getting paid. I have factored invoices before, and it is a godsend. And when you need it, there's nothing better. But ideally, you don't have to do it every time you get invoicing. Please elaborate.
Yeah, there's another layer of complexity here, and that is kind of the adoption of these payment portals. Like the biggest ones are US Bank and Cass, who are both partners as well. Um, I can completely understand how a major multinational, for the exact reasons I hit on early on about data, um, not only data integrity, but data, centralized data access. That's why a major complex company would use a big centralized freight payment and audit platform. There's essentially a stamp of approval from a third party that this is what you owe in freight. These are the guidelines and the requirements that we want if I was a shipper, I'm talking now. We want our freight payment auditing company to enforce these requirements, and we'll get one bill a week, and it just makes it so easy compared to, imagine a major company like, Caterpillar or somebody like that. I mean, how are you going to pay 10,000 freight bills from many different countries? I mean, it's impossible, right? I mean, you need an army of people. So having a standardized freight payment and audit function is really, really good for major shippers. However, now take a even medium-sized freight broker or medium-sized carrier. Um, you have some customers doing business with this freight payment auditing portal. You have others doing business with this freight payment auditing portal. And we're hearing that, like, there's women in the accounting room at one of these major brokers that on Wednesdays they bill this customer because they have to go into that portal. And then on Thursdays they do this customer, and on Fridays they do this customer, because it's they have to manually upload invoices into those
It's
portals.
intensive, labor intensive, and difficult.
Well, the challenge really starts to become the time. Like if you got your carrier bill on Monday, but you don't invoice that customer till Friday, you've already given your shipper customer a week before you've even sent them the bill. And so it's about the, not necessarily like the function, because many have offshored this, but it's the time and the human touch that takes. And then to find out there's an exception with that.
It bounces it back.
Yeah, bounce it back, and that one's sitting for another week. And then you're like, hey, why are we have so much money outstanding? And when you multiply that times, um, tens of thousands of loads a month, if you're a major carrier or a broker, I mean, you're talking about millions and millions of dollars that could just be picked up and put right to the bottom line just by automating this process. And so,
Yes. And if I could add something to that is, I think a lot of people, we all have emails we have to get to or an invoice that we have to get to. If it's challenging and you go, I'm not exactly sure what I'm going to say, or this is a pain in the ass. Every time I do this, it bounces back. We procrastinate. That's what humans do. For a difficult task, you put it off. And not everybody, but it happens enough. And if you can simplify it, and if you can automate it, then we take out the human desire to avoid challenging things.
well, the problems don't stop there. I mean, now let's say you're a broker or a carrier and you do get paid. and you get in a $54,287 payment. Now you have to take a spreadsheet or sometimes even a PDF, and you have to check and apply. It's called cash app or cash application. You have to apply that payment to open invoices. That's a major problem. Um, and so reading the documents on the carrier receipt, what if they send you a carrier delivery receipt from a different load? I mean, that happens. I mean, if you're the broker, you have to sort through all that. So the problems in AR all end up contributing to not having enough money to keep yourself solvent. I mean, so
So let's talk about the solution. We talked about the problem, and I think anybody who's listening, it's not a real big reach to say, do you think not invoicing on time and getting paid on time is a problem? Yes, clearly it's a problem. It's a problem if you're a lemonade stand, but we're in a difficult. I know we probably hit bottom and we're slowly coming out of this difficult time, but it still can be a very low margin business. We got lots of problems. We'd like to focus our energies on growth and on our people and on our customers. But what we tend to find ourselves is, oh, we got to deal with this problem. Otherwise, we're not getting paid. So Upwell has a solution. Please describe that solution.
so the Upwell is a software that sits between the TMS and accounting software typically. And so we can pull delivery receipts can go, what used to go into just the TMS can also be copied to Upwell. And then that invoice from Upwell can be uploaded into all the payment portals or sent out to the customer, or statement reminders are all configurable in Upwell so that if, for example, we have to bill company a certain way with like a load number in the subject line, or somebody wants, maybe an order number, you can configure the billing to be completely customized by the to comply with the customer's requirements. It can also go up to the payment portals like we talked about. So again, I'm using Caterpillar. If there was an example just of a really big international company that's got complex billing, I'm guessing that Caterpillar would be tough to bill. You would have to upload into, exactly the way they want into US Bank or CAS. I'm not sure who they use. We don't work with them. But in this example, you could automate that entire thing rather than have, assignment of personnel to tackle that billing, which seems to be happening all over the place.
So you said you sit between the TMS, which we're all familiar with, and also, would you say, what's the other?
The accounting software.
The accounting software, and which could be any number of those softwares. And in effect, what Upwell does is it understands the requirements and makes sure that it's each invoice is customized for that customer to ensure that it's accepted and paid on a timely basis.
Correct. I mean, some softwares out there are better than others. So that the customization part in some TMSs is better than others. Typically, we see a two-way sync with accounting is not really existent. So if you change something in your, Sage or QuickBooks or whatever accounting software you're using, maybe an Oracle or SAP product, it doesn't always report back to the TMS, and somebody has to go do that manually. So we're finding is that there's different levels of sophistication in the AR in different companies. If a broker is using an off-the-shelf TMS with QuickBooks, which is like the most common setup we've seen, then we know the problems really, really well. All of these things are like on a severity, like a 7 out of 10 problem. It's not a 10 out of 10 problem because they're clearly still getting invoices out, but it just takes throwing bodies at the problem to resolve it. We're seeing major companies like the top 100. They have a lot more custom development that have addressed a lot of these issues. So our scope there might be more like just automating interaction with the portals, which is still done typically with bodies. So every company has this problem, but it's on like a bell curve of who has kind of like some of this stuff is like a medium-sized problem, some is a massive problem. some of them, if you take like the top 10 publicly traded trucking and companies and freight brokerages, then maybe they've whittled away a lot of this automation, but they still have some things that that they definitely can need. So we haven't found anybody yet that we can't help with helping to automate a part of accounts receivable so that they can ultimately get paid faster.
Yeah, and in fact, what you're doing is, if I can say, look, I had days outstanding was 40 and now I'm down to 20, that just basically is cash flow.
Well, it's not that extreme. But it is average. I mean, our goal is if we could do 4 days. That is, if you
So
take
4 days is 4 days. I mean,
it could mean all the difference between making payroll and missing payroll.
I know you've probably done this, and I know I have done this. When you're, we had this conversation the other day that somebody says, "How's business going?" "Oh, we're doing really well. We've made a lot of sales." And then you think, "Yeah, but I don't have any money." Like, so I'm living off my credit card. I'm owed money. I made the sale. I did the work, but I'm not paid yet. And I think there's a lot of people probably listening to the podcast saying, "Yeah, yeah, I've had a good month where I had no money in my pocket." And that's the crazy part of business. And for the most part, smaller companies are always carrying the paper of bigger companies.
Yeah, we can think about that too. Like when we think, imagine you're a leader at a big trucking company or a big 3PL. When you think about your best customers, I guarantee that a lot of them are like, that SOB, they never pay their bill, but they're our best customer and they're our highest profile, and maybe not the highest margin, but they're the best for your company. But you deep down you swear them because like you need that money, especially the big customers, because they they twist and tweak so much to make you work with them, right? At such what ends up being such a low margin that if you're not collecting that money, it could actually be the death of you, which we saw. I mean, kudos to FedEx, right? With Amazon. I'm not saying that was all a billing issue, but I'll bet you if Amazon was paying them in a very like a net 5 or net 10, I'll bet you that they would have revisited that.
Oh, FedEx used to have a deal with Amazon that they got rid of because of money flow.
I don't know if that was only that or if it's just operating margin or what it was, but FedEx went after higher margin business than Amazon, and I'll bet you it was a culmination of problems that made FedEx realize that, hey, the biggest possible customer is not good for our business. And I think that's the case with a lot of folks right now in the logistics space, going through a massive downturn. Probably as you start to come out of that, and carriers too, now that the loads are becoming available, we should be looking at our book of business the same way I talked about the real estate portfolio. We should be looking at our business objectively, saying what doesn't make sense or what's not good for us.
Yeah. And by the way, you know this, and I know I know this, that the business failures happen when we're coming out of a bad time. Because what happens when you're going out of a bad time is you're invoicing less and less and less. And then all of a sudden you go, "Oh, we had a really good month. We're up 20%." And everybody's excited, except that's more money being spent. And that's when they realize we have cash flow issues. And if for whatever reason you're working with companies that are paying you a little slow, it doesn't take much. I think most businesses are not very far away from their last day in business. And it all comes back to that cash flow. So let's switch gears for a second. Let's just say somebody's listening and they say, "Yes, Brad Hollister, Charlie Dahoney, I have this problem." And that sounds like you have the solution. Let's talk about implementation. What does that look like? If somebody calls and says, "Hey, Brad, hey, Charlie, I got that problem. How do you fix it?" Walk us through that.
Well, the most common problem that we see there's several problems that we address. The most common is integration with all these payment portals. So we already have all of that tech built. And this is the exciting thing for me as an investor looking at this company, and then as a volunteer in the beginning of trying to make some phone calls and get on some calls and help with message. When I saw that this whole thing is built already, this platform of integration with these portals, and like a company can just literally direct all their proof of deliveries into an Upwell email address, and then that will just send it up to the portal. It really becomes a no code integration. Now, some companies have wanted to customize some of that, which requires coding. But for the most part, what I love is like, man, we could have somebody up and running in a day. That's unbelievable. And it's really normally when you're selling TMS or selling other things, you have to go through like several rounds of committees and decision makers, and then finally you have to convince the person writing the check that this is something they need. But when we can go right to that person it's a very light solution. It's a fraction of a person essentially is the cost. Even to a big company, it's a fraction of the labor that it replaces. It's a no brainer for them, and then doesn't need IT to get involved. So it is really a fun company to work for, if that's for sure.
Well, and again, the problem is universal. It's in a lot of different businesses, but it really stings when you're a low margin business. And I've told this story before. My dad owned an engineering business, and I remember we were owed money by a big automotive company, and they didn't pay us on time. But we had engineers and CAD like designers on staff, and they all got paid very well. And I remember flipping through Sports Illustrated back in the olden days, and it said, "Sell us your invoices." And I was like, "Oh yeah, sure. Yeah, that's not for my invoices." And I called them. They were in New York, and they're like, "We don't deal with anything automotive, but call these guys. They'll help you." And they were in Michigan. And I remember I called them, and I was like, as they were describing, "We'll buy these invoices," I didn't hear what we were paying for that. I just said to my dad, I called my dad. I was like, "Hey, look at this." And he's like, "That doesn't make any sense. That makes no sense. Why would they buy these invoices that aren't being paid?" And then I was like, "Cause they're like a loan." And then I remember my dad's like, "Hallelujah. Like it just really helped ease payroll so we can make payroll." But then I remember my dad said this, "Look how damn expensive this is." And there was no flexibility in that. Once you start sending one invoice, they wanted all of them kind of thing. And by the way, there's a lot of factoring companies out there that are great. And again, I mentioned my friends Denim, very flexible. They had a lot of value in the middle of that. But they'll let you do an occasional one, not every single one. But ideally, yeah, it's unique. Ideally, you don't need to factor your bills. And again, it's wonderful to have the option. That's why we have the Denims out there. But ideally, you go, I'm going to just get paid on the money I'm owed. I was owed it last Friday, and I got it last Friday. Hallelujah! That's how it should work.
Factoring, I cringe to think where our country would be without factoring companies, because the factoring companies make trucking companies keep rolling.
It's the grease, man.
Well, I was with Charlie in Vegas at Manifest 2 years ago, and an executive from a major carrier sat down with us, somebody that I know, somebody that he knows, and we were talking about Upwell, and it was just when he was kind of kicking the idea around. And he said to this person, he's given the early pitch, right? Just pure raw emotion on the problem and what his solution that he envisioned could do. And this person looked on their phone and said, "Well, let me see how much we have outstanding right now." And they looked and they had like a lot, like $60 million outstanding. And so Charlie said, "Well, how much of that is over 30 days?" And did a filter on the phone. I didn't see the phone, just did the filter. And this executive said 45 million over 30 days. And so the point in that is, I think that we've heard the expression "time kills deals." I mean, time kills kills the 3PL and the carrier margin, right? Because now you're introducing an element of risk to like an adverse effect, or even like a hurricane in a region, or an earthquake. or like any kind of like non-controllable risk that doesn't exist if you just get paid faster. But there might be a risk to business next week, next month. Even a well-intentioned or well-positioned company could have some kind of strange situation that would now all of a sudden wasn't a planned risk that would interrupt that cash flow cycle. And that's like another intangible element to this. It's just get the money, just collect the money. Charlie says, stop letting your customers um, have access to your bank account, or stop letting your customers hold your funds. And it's really true. And so, if we could get brokers and carriers paid faster, then it really starts to help them to address all the other challenges in the business. But without this money and without this cash cycle, it's tough to address.
Yep. And I'm thinking you mentioned that you want to help them get 4 days, which is basically a week. I mean, and I think if I'm hearing you right, this speeds up when you invoice. So we're going to invoice faster, and we're going to be more likely to be correct or compliant with what the customer wants. So that's how I get the time back. And again, that's time is money.
Well, I mean, I remember, even when I was, I've done some other consulting things, helping some people, and like I have to send an invoice. And a friend of mine is a laborer. He did some work here at my house, and he didn't send me an invoice for like a month.
Oh, I've done that. I've delayed on that. You get busy with other stuff. You're traveling. You don't invoice.
I got to do it. Oh, and then your family wants to go to the movies or something. It's like, all right, I'm going to do that when I get back. I'm too tired. I'll do it tomorrow. Like, now that's on a small scale, of course. We are hearing that there's a major grocery store chain that's like literally almost impossible to bill. So the requirements are so hard. And so we're working with this broker to start to watch those workflows, because it's time for us to go downstream into the more niche payment portals, because chances are this grocery store chain probably has several hundred carriers also that are experiencing the same problem as the person we're talking to. So, they literally have to take 4 women on Wednesdays in the afternoon. They just this grocery store, and it's crazy.
I've experienced this when I was selling logistics services. I remember meeting with a customer, and they insisted that we were doing mostly less than truckload. And I remember they said, on the BOL, we need the following information. And it was just, I was like, this doesn't all need to be on the BOL. And they're like, yeah, that's our requirement. And I was like, it makes no sense. And I was like, I don't even know why you would want to share this put it on the BOL. But they were wedded to it. And I remember we didn't win that business, but I remember saying afterwards, I was like, probably for the best, because this was going to be like a real pain in the ass. And every time you'd move a load for them, it would be like, don't forget to add the other 16 lines of gibberish that they need for that deal. And by the way, I'm being a little dismissive of their needs. A lot of these companies, I think, are using the bills for the data. So they want to be able to connect this field to this field to this field. So who am I to say it's not necessary? But if it slows me down from invoicing because it's a pain in the ass, and if it slows me down from getting it through on the first time, I'm costing myself money. It's not hurting them. It's hurting me and my company.
We heard a publicly traded controller of a publicly traded 3PL this week say, I understand these large shippers use these payment portals, but they forget sometimes that they're the customer. So they can choose to make it easy on their vendors. And they don't have to always go for the most complex way that one of these payment portals typically does it. They can choose to force the portals to be easier for the vendors. So
a lot of times they don't think about it.
yeah, well, it has been a lot of fun just to see how there's so often, Joe, that we talk to a company, a small 3PL, maybe like 100 million in revenue, which is still a pretty sizable company, but on the grand scheme of things, not massive in the 3PL space. But just hearing the silence on the phone, and then finally someone going, gosh, we need this so bad. Like, and that's what for me, in seeing Charlie's passion, knowing that he's a very investable person. in terms of his business acumen, his success, and then watching the team he built, looking at the impact of these companies that the product has on these companies. It's just been a super fun way to spend my time in the last 2 months.
Anyway, let me wrap this bad boy up, then I'm going to get your final thoughts on the topic. Let me summarize. So I'm talking to my friend Brad Hollister. We're talking about solving the freight broker's biggest problem. And as we've discussed, one of the biggest problem is money, 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 money. I can solve a lot of my other problems if I have money. And where we're not getting our money on a timely basis is on our accounts receivable. And a lot of times that's due because the invoicing is very difficult, has a lot of requirements. If you don't comply fully, you don't get paid. It gets bounced out of the portal. And so what you guys are doing is you're coming between the TMS and the bill and the accounting system and doing that customization. So when that invoice gets submitted, it's correct because the AI is doing it and it's consistent. So no longer do I procrastinate about that pain in the ass bill. It gets pushed out. It gets pushed out quickly. And that solution is getting them days outstanding. So in effect, you said 4 days, which I was like basically 1 business week. If you can get all your money 4 days faster, even for a small firm, that is a massive, massive upgrade. It's days you don't have to borrow from your credit card. And the implementation, from what you said, is very, very easy.
Oftentimes the goal is no code.
I love it. So put a big old bow on this one, Brad Hollister. Final thoughts on the topic.
Watch Upwell. It's a cool company. It's cool people, and the Mount Rushmore of the logistics industry probably have a few dollars in it actually. And so, and to me that's important because it shows that they believe in it. The adoption is wide. They recognize it's a massive problem. The company really was founded in 2024 and has already achieved very impressive results in the last 6 months alone. So I'm having fun at this point in my career. I love working with Charlie and his team, and making a lot of friends and changing a lot of lives for the better here. So
I love it. I love it. What I'll do is, Brad, I'll make sure I put a link to your LinkedIn profile, a link to the Upwell website, and any of the links you and your marketing team give me. I will also put a link to my last interview with you, which was a few years back. And I'll put a link to the interview I did with Charlie, I think in 6 months ago, 8 months ago, whenever it was. Anyway, what conferences will we see you and the fine folks from Upwell at?
well, I really wanted to go to FreightWaves in Chattanooga, I think next week or the week after. We have so much stuff that we're trying to get over the finish line through the rest of the year. So we decided as a group to just keep heads down and hammer it through
There are so many conferences. It's hard to get to them all. I was at CSCMP, I was at Trimble. I love both those events. And I was at the cybersecurity conference in Cleveland. And I would love to be at so many others, but to your point, somebody's got to go do the day job.
I think for us, and my title at Upwell is head of growth. So I need to really drive the strategy and where we spend the money. We're not a huge company right now, but we need to spend, with not the shotgun approach, but the, more of the, calculated approach on where we spend our money. And for me, I think we need to set goals of what we want out of each conference. I would love to go to FreightWaves. If anybody from FreightWaves is listening, please change it to not this time.
This is going to publish after the event.
Oh, is it? Okay. I wish FreightWaves could be the first week in December when everyone's already in punt mode anyways for the year. I mean, because after December, no one works anyways. But for me, Manifest is good because it's a partnership.
Oh, I'll see you there.
Yeah, it's going to be for partnerships. I think we need to get to the individual where the users are and the decision makers are. So like TIA is going to be really good for us on the 3PL side. The Trimble stuff, let's face it, Trimble is one of the top, asset management software suites out there. So any place where there's a carrier software management or software for management of fleets would be a good spot for us to be. So yes, certainly no shortage of things to go to. And for me, we did 2 shows in October, and man, I feel like I was really far behind on even the stuff that we had.
Right. It's very easy. So we'll see it manifest. I'm sure you guys will be at some other of these broker type conferences. Now, I didn't ask this specifically, so I'll ask it now. I know clearly you work with freight brokers. Do you also work with carriers?
Yeah, the carriers are great for us as well. And we have a lot of conversations with large carriers. I mean, the carrier has to have complexity for Upwell to be of value. Imagine if you had one truck and you were just working within the CH Robinson ecosystem, or you were just factoring, we can't really help you. So the thing is, I think that if carriers are using factoring companies, they're probably not a good fit. Now, factoring companies are not as automated as I would have thought either, though. So I think we'll see some announcements about us partnering with some factoring companies to automate some of their back end as well. But really, the sky's the limit here as far as the Upwell journey. I mean, even overseas freight forwarding invoices, these problems exist all over the world, and we're excited for the opportunity to address them.
I love it. Well, Brad, thank you so much for taking the time.
All right. Thanks for having me, Joe.
And thank all of you for listening to my podcast. Your support's very much appreciated. I truly mean that. I know I always say it, but I truly appreciate your support. Until next time, onward and upward. You have been listening to the Logistics of Logistics podcast, where we engage with leaders in the logistics and supply chain community. If you like what you hear, please subscribe, hit the like button, and leave us a nice review on Apple or Spotify or wherever else you listen. Also, please check out our videos on YouTube and connect with us on LinkedIn. We're very big on LinkedIn. And you can also reach us on the logisticsoflogistics.com, our website.